In the 1920s, there was a textile strike in India, and during the final 3 days of it, something happened which I think shows us the key to how we save the world at the present time. That is my claim, and it is a big claim, but please do not think that I'm not totally serious about it. I am. Of course, I have to be humble enough to accept I could be wrong, but by the same token, I should also not be untruthful and falsely modest. I should communicate what I think, and what I think is that in those 3 days, there is the key to our collective salvation. Maybe some of you know the story, but it's worth looking at in some detail. It is the story of Gandhi's role in a strike of thousands of workers against mill owners in the city of Ahmedabad. The employers refused to accept the workers' demands, and so Gandhi advised them to go on strike. The labourers all pledged not to return to work until the demands were met, or the dispute went to arbitration. It all started off enthusiastically, as these things usually do, with marches and daily mass meetings. But after 2 weeks, people started to go back to work, and the collective commitment began to break down. It is extremely interesting to see how Gandhi writes about this in his autobiography. What is clear is that his concern is not about the failure to win the strike. His concern is about the question of honour, the maintenance of the pledge. He sees his responsibility not as an instrumental matter of getting success. Rather, he is concerned with what he calls his duty in response to the situation. And then, as he was making a speech to the workers, to quote from the book, unbidden and all by themselves, the words came to my lips. He declared, "I will not touch food." That is, he would fast until the workers kept their pledge and the strike was resolved. Workers who heard his words began to cry. Note carefully here, his going on this unlimited fast was not intended to be a power move, a plan to coerce the owners into accepting the demands. As he explicitly writes, "I knew that I might not fast against them, but ought to leave them free to be influenced by the mill hand strike alone," even though he knew that, to quote again, "my fast was bound to put pressure on them," as in fact it did, but I felt I could not help it. The duty to undertake the fast seemed to me to be clear. He says to the mill owners, "There is not the slightest necessity for you to withdraw your position." Indeed, he was impressed by their resolve, including the resolve of their leader, and wrote, "It was a pleasure to be pitched against him." So let's just stop and notice the extreme weirdness of what is going on here, the microdynamics of what was happening on the first day of this fast. There is something we might call pre-modern going on. Gandhi's whole approach is based upon a very specific way of being and way of seeing, which is saturated in the notion of being good for the sake of being good for the sake of the truth, and of course, being good for the sake of being with God, to gain a glimpse of God, as he puts it later in his book. The outcome of the strike in itself was neither here nor there. This, as we know, is the absolute opposite of the modern way of being and seeing, that is saturated with the logic of the instrumental, the utilitarian, the outcome. Our contemporary world is obsessed with the question of what we need to do to get something, to achieve something, to profit from something. Gandhi did not care about this. Of course, no doubt, he wanted to win the strike, but that was for God to decide on, not him. His duty was to act in truth, nothing more and nothing less. So, Let's see what happened next. After spending several paragraphs dealing with his duty to fast, due to the workers breaking their pledge, he mentions briefly in his book the outcome in a few lines. To quote, "The net result of it was an atmosphere of goodwill that was created all round. The owners agreed to instruct an arbitrator," and he writes that the strike was called off after I had fasted only for 3 days. 3 days, that's all it took. Conventional materialistic analysis would say the reason for his success was the coercion of Gandhi's fast, but this is total ideological nonsense. The reason he won was because of something materialistic analysis cannot see. As he puts it himself, the hearts of the mill owners were touched. They were overcome not by the fast in itself, but by the self-evident intention of Gandhi not to coerce them, by the moral and spiritual purity and thus beauty of a man who preferred to die rather than to see a pledge broken. In the face of this soul or truth force, they could not resist their consciences, the call of their hearts. They could not stand against him. The language we use here is difficult because, of course, what is happening is not a matter of material cause and effect. It can, in truth, only effectively be communicated in religious terms, which our culture cannot allow us to see as real. But, as a matter of empirical observation, what happened was absolutely real. It is just that the secular analysis of power cannot see the obvious, that what happened was above all about love, not about power. Conventional analysis cannot see this reality because it's trapped in its own miserable tautology, its own closed reasoning, that there is only power because there is only power, and so there is only power. Reason becomes unreason. We see this most clearly in Western culture with the conventional historical analyses that project 101 reasons for the spread of Christianity after the death of Jesus, in order, no doubt, to avoid the bleeding obvious reason that the story of the crucifixion showed that God's love for humanity was so deep he gave his only son. This reality touched hearts in a way that no other story did, and people converted. And the power of this overcame the Roman Empire. In a similar way, Gandhi's love touched hearts, and that is why they won the strike, and how the British occupation of India was overcome. After the death of Gandhi, as you may know, Gene Sharp came along and took this whole approach of what came to be called nonviolence and secularized it. He turned it into behavioral psychology, the Newtonian physics of materiality, meaning a game of billiard balls, one power upon another power. The bigger the materiality, the bigger the force, the more likely you were to win. The opposition splits, elements of the elite's defect. All the supposedly sentimental nonsense about touching hearts, the beauty of truth, the paradox of love, the call of duty and honor, the walking in the path of God, all that is taken out, meaning how the participants actually see themselves is dismissed and disregarded. Their way of seeing, their very culture, in fact, is colonized by Western language, the language of power. This is the very same way of seeing that views everyone and everything as essentially dead, in analytical terms as dead matter. It is the exact same way of seeing that allows people to destroy nature because they can, because, well, it's not all gone yet, and so we should use it. Utility, instrumentalization, manipulation. This is the ideology of power. I hope you see what is happening here. What has been going on is the imperialistic oppression of one worldview by another, and so we have allowed ourselves to be duped into seeing our resistance in the way our opponents want us to see it. We have allowed ourselves to be trapped within the oppressor's paradigm. Our resistance, in other words, has yet to become a resistance for itself. And so, of course, this is why we are failing. Because we don't get that we have to have the courage to liberate ourselves from the opponent's frame and see the obvious, the great paradox that is at the center of human existence, that we only achieve the good by being good for the sake of being good. If you're good in order to achieve the good, then you will fail. This is the view of 1,000 works of traditional wisdom. There's nothing new here, and it is also overwhelmingly confirmed now by modern psychological observational research, as I discovered when I did my case studies at King's College. When I went on hunger strike as part of my demand that the college divest from fossil fuels, it was, again, the shortest such campaign ever. We won in only 2 weeks. I came out of the experience convinced that a key factor was my profound and conscious detachment from wanting to win the campaign, and thus my relaxed and courteous relationship with my opponent, the Vice-Chancellor of the college. In fact, to repeat Gandhi's words, it was a pleasure to be pitched against him. At the resolution of the campaign, we shook hands in front of the press. This, then, is why modern secular civil resistance strategies continually fail, because they cannot see what is actually important, what actually makes the change. They take the material action and extract out of it all the spirit. We are left just talking about billiard balls. This is why, at the present moment, the movement has an epidemic of what is called burnout, meaning people feeling like they are failing because they are failing to get results. They are trying to win the textile strike. The paradox is that they are failing because they are obsessed with not failing. In other words, they are powerless because they are obsessed with getting the power to make the change. We are burning out, in other words, because we want to be good in order to see the good happening, rather than enjoying doing the good and leaving the outcome to God. In the deepest sense, in a sense that drives secular people mad, we are failing because we have left the pathway of God. We have killed God, as Nietzsche puts it, but we will only find salvation in God, meaning we have condemned ourselves through this most foundational separation of the material from the divine. And so we go full circle here. We find ourselves 1,000,000 miles away from Gene Sharp. And yes, we need to be 1,000,000 miles away from him to actually succeed. We come back to Gandhi's glorious passion for acting in the truth as an end in itself. You see, once you get over the burning blow to your humanist ego, you can see that there is a massive cosmic joke going on here. Speaking for myself, I find it quite hilarious, but that might just be my slightly perverse sense of humor. So where are we? Of course, I know what you're thinking. Well, that was Gandhi. He was an amazing guy. We could not be like him. In actual fact, as a matter of empirical observation again, nothing could be further from the truth. Like with anything, some people have more of a talent for some things than other things. But the main determinant of being able to see like Gandhi is simply 2 things: training and practice. It is, in fact, just a cultural construction like any other. After all societies are full of people who go to war risk their lives for nation, politics, religion, even sport. It's actually the norm, not the exception, to be prepared to make sacrifices for your beliefs, to act out of duty and honour. Our culture, then, is the exception here, a temporary, historically situated obsession with the material self, which is now coming to an end. Think about what motivated thousands of people to walk towards the police, to be beaten up during the Salt March, and what motivated the tens of thousands of people to be put in prison by the authorities during that campaign. Was there something special about India? Well, obviously not, given that millions of people were killed in the years afterwards during the partition after independence. No, the causal factor is the proactive creation of a specific culture. What is required is a systematic program of self-purification, as Gandhi would call it. We are failing because we do not do this, and we need to start to now. And again, it's not like we don't know how to do it. Every society uses broadly the same methods of cultural education. We start with sessions on the facts and the arguments. So far, so good. But then we have to move on to testimonies, visualizations, role plays, and then silence, meditation, and prayer. And then initiation ceremonies, pledge making, and support teams. People need to practice transcending themselves. That this, what they're going to do, is not about them, and practice doing so over and over again, each week in fact. We've been socialized into thinking that doing such a thing is brainwashing by our culture. But think about how much brainwashing is required to make people in our culture stand by while plans are made to destroy our children's lives, to destroy our whole way of life. What level of manipulation, of evil, is needed to turn us into such fearful, helpless, hopeless people that we cannot act in the face of what is now objectively happening? We need then a complete rethink about how we train and recruit people for non-violence, as it's called. Instead of being persuaded by saying, look, if you do this, then that will happen, and that's why you should act. We should instead suggest, if you do this, nothing will happen, and that's why you still should do it. In other words, the eternal wisdom of action as non-action. It is, of course, a revolutionary change. It is the revolution we need in the 21st century. And it starts by having mini assemblies to bring people together. Then people can be briefed and invited to go through a program of personal change as just described. Of course, not everyone will or should move into explicit resistance. When people start the Couch to 5K running program, not all the people make it to 5K, but many do. It's fundamentally the same sort of process. Mini assemblies have the potential to bring tens of thousands of people into these processes, but we only need, say, 1,000 people to go to prison in an average Western democracy for policy change to happen. Certainly not the tens of thousands Gandhi mobilized. But we are back to instrumentalism here, aren't we? Old habits. The point is to do good, because it's a good thing to do. Let me finish with the example of myself. I have been imprisoned for a longer amount of time than any peaceful campaigner in modern UK history, 5 years. I should be mad, bitter, and burning out. But as you may have noticed, I'm doing fine. Sure, I have my off days, don't we all? But the point is, I'm a million miles away from burning out. And this is emphatically not because I'm some amazing person. I am, in fact, very shy, quite cowardly, and I hate confrontation. The reason I'm fine is quite simply because I do not share the way of seeing of 90% of conventional activists. And I've been explicitly practicing this other way of seeing for years now. When I first went in the road, my legs were literally shaking. Now, if I go to court, I'm thinking about what I'm going to be reading that evening. It is just another day, because, of course, it objectively is just that. It is just another day. And this, incidentally, is how many people in prison see the world. Prison, in fact, is the best training ground. You're inspired by other prisoners. They've been through so much shit, and yet they still move through it. As my philosophical cellmate says, it is what it is. I dedicate this talk to him. So yes, it's action time, people. We're looking for 100 people to pledge, note that word, no breaking it please, to do a mini assembly. We've got about 50, 70 people so far, so we're almost there. So please can you spread the word and sign up 1 or 2 people that you know. It only takes them an hour and a half. And we'll be working on a follow-up training program. More information will be given. That's it. Thank you so much, everyone, and I wish you all the best. Bye.